Watchman on the Pod. I'm not sure if I'll be able to get this book completed tonight as I was hoping, but we shall see. This is Forgiving What You Can't Forget by Lysa Terkeurst. We're in chapter 10. Because they thought God would save them. Where was God when this happened? And if he is all powerful, why didn't he stop this? He could change this today. He could fix this right now. He could do a miracle. So why doesn't he? I made hundreds of suggestions to God about how he could fix all that was wrong while we were in our tunnel of chaos season. But God didn't intervene like I kept thinking he would. I kept imagining all the ways God could stop all of this, the pain, the tragic destruction, the damage that kept compounding day by day. I prayed and I prayed. Then I would get up from my prayers and watch in great expectation for glimmers of hope and small evidences of reassurance. I kept setting up perfect scenarios for God to move in. And then surely if I saw God do what I thought he should do, rescue and restore, then I would do what he was requiring me to do, forgive. I wouldn't have said I was trying to make a deal with God, but I definitely thought we both had parts to play. I was holding my breath, waiting for a glorious shift where I could finally exhale with relief. Day after day I prayed, watched, believed, cried, fell on my bed exhausted, prayed some more, dreamed of better days, and fought off all the worst-case scenario visions that nipped at the edges of my mind whenever I tried to sleep. But the more I didn't see any tangible evidence of God intervening with art, the more unseen and unheard I felt. The more unseen and unheard I felt, the more my deal with God fell apart. God, if you aren't going to do your part, how can you possibly expect me to do mine? Christian statements like, I know God is carrying you. He is fighting this battle for you. He is working good even in the midst of this all started to feel like words good for posters that hang in churches or points for sermons or memes for Instagram, but not real promises for real pain. My prayers that used to fill up pages of my journal were reduced to one question: why? Praise songs that I used to sing with bold assurance and raised arms were now mere whispers. I could barely make myself mouth the words. The word hope has always been one of my absolute favorite spiritual perspectives. I loved it so much that the minute my first baby was born, I declared it as her name. I love what this word stands for. Us I love what it helps us stand up under. Webster's gives this definition of hope. It's a feeling of expectation and a desire for certain things to happen. But have you ever heard someone say that you are just trying to keep hope alive? Sounds more like a patient on life support than a promise on standby. The more I like the more I felt like hope was a risk rather than an assurance, the more I became afraid of the word rather than comforted by it. To say I had hope felt like I was risking something on God's behalf that could make us both look incredibly foolish. I wouldn't dare verbalize it that bluntly. But when you are living out a story that makes no human sense at all, fear seems like the most rational of all internal commentaries. So hoping meant hurting even more with every passing, unchanged moment. I no longer wanted to have hope in my situation with art, and the more I lost hope, the more I resisted forgiveness. Maybe it's because I equated forgiveness with moving on. But how do you move forward when you don't have a clue which direction is forward? Do I move toward forgiving and healing that results in us being together in the end? Or do I move toward forgiving and healing without art? Why isn't God making this clear? Why isn't God stopping this runway situation? What good does it do to keep hoping? And yet to say I was losing hope sounded like I had no faith. It was a no-win tug-of-war battle dealt with by saying no comment. Or better yet, just avoiding conversations where questions would surely arise. Invitations by people were kind and generous, wanting to spend time with me, felt terrifyingly threatening. I wasn't sure what I might say that would definitely line up with who I know myself to be, or at least who I once was. I have this strange thing about my personality that I can't always immediately determine exactly what I'm feeling. It's either an up feeling or a down feeling, but exactly what I'm feeling is hard to identify. And even when I figure out from all the available emotions which I'm feeling, then I have to work to figure out the right issue to attach as the cause. But in this situation, everything felt down and directly attached to art. My life felt like it was on wheels, tethered to choices headed down to an abyss from which very few ever return. There I was, running beside the disaster in the making, trying to hope for the best, pray for the best, grab onto a life I very much loved, rushing past me, and just getting yanked into the asphalt, bloodied and bruised. Everything hurt. Everything felt impossible. Even everyday decision about small things became overwhelmingly complicated. What to wear and what to eat seemed so trivial and exhausting, all at the same time. I ignored texts, emails, and phone calls and stopped going to simple places like the grocery store or the drugstore unless it was absolutely necessary. And even then, I was so scared someone would know me and want to talk to me, I would often never make it far enough into the store to actually get what I wanted or needed. I was utterly lost inside my own life. I could be completely desperate to get home and drive right past my driveway without even registering in the slightest that there was where I needed to turn. And please note, I've lived in the same house on the same street for more than 27 years. God could see all of this. God could see my hurt, disillusionment, utter confusion, and desperate need for help. I absolutely believed in him. But that became part of the problem because I'd seen him do powerful things in my life before, miraculous things. I had astounding evidence of his faithfulness. So why did every request I made with my marriage seem to go absolutely unheard? It was especially maddening when I felt like I had done everything I could to completely set the scene for God to move. I remember one Saturday morning, Art agreed to go to a prayer service with me. I was shocked he agreed to go and felt an unusual surge of hope through my heart. I could see the whole thing in my mind right now, as clear as if the whole day was being replayed on a movie screen. When there's extreme emotion tied to a particular memory, I remember the strangest precise details. I remember the textured fabric of the gray seats in the sanctuary. I remember Art lifting his hands in worship. I cried. I just knew God was doing something. The pastor led us through a short message and then instructed us to walk forward and pick up some cards to pray for others while we were also praying for situations in our own lives. Soft music and whispered prayers filled the air. Most walked around while praying. Some sat in their seats. Some prayed in small groups. I hesitated before moving, hoping Art would want to pray with me. But after several minutes of him not initiating this, I decided to leave my seat and walk forward. White prayer cards were placed up front on the edge of the stage. When I walked forward to get a card, I saw it was filled out with red ink. It was written by a man in prison. He wanted prayer for his son. My second card was from another man in that same prison, and so was my third card. Though it seemed like I had nothing in common with the men behind bars, I knew exactly what it was like to feel trapped and unable to escape. I walked back down the aisle around the back, praying, but also looking over at Art. Was he praying? Was he crying? Was God moving his heart, changing his mind, finally answering my prayers? I couldn't tell. Then I felt strange for watching. Maybe I shouldn't try and see the miracle happen. I looked down and vowed to just let God move. I was so sure this was the day it would all turn around. Please, God, make this happen. The prayer service ended with a beautiful corporate prayer and a send-off praise song. I watched people filing out of the church. I know they were not all smiling and laughing, but pangs of jealousy stabbed at me. They were returning to a version of normal that I used to have. Imperfect, yes, but so much more predictable than traumatic. I didn't have to ask Art any questions to know the miracle hadn't come. I could feel it. We went out to breakfast. I could hardly choke down some eggs. Something unseen was squeezing my throat with so much emotional tension. I knew if whatever was holding back my tears gave way, they might not ever stop. Later that night, I was in a fetal position. One of my best friends was there reminding me to breathe. Inside my head, I flat out told God I could no longer believe for something so impossible. I trusted him to help me survive, but to really bring something this dead alive, I was too tired and traumatized by what I could no longer see to hope beyond the obvious. I just kept thinking the least God could do was tell me which direction to point my hope in, that we would eventually be healed together or that I needed to move on without art. Those two versions of healing seem very different. Those two stories of forgiveness seem very different. I don't know how to say this, but I think it needs to be said. I felt I was working so hard to keep my heart in a good place, a forgiving place, a hopeful place, that I almost decided it would just be easier to let bitterness have its full way with my heart. The payoff of forgiveness didn't seem to be there like I'd hoped. These feelings of disillusionment, left unattended, start to seem like facts about God when our circumstances don't turn like we believed they would. In my last book, It's Not Supposed to Be This Way, I tackled a situation where physical pain brought me to this place of wondering how a good God could see me hurting and do nothing about it. And then when the pain was finally diagnosed and corrected with surgery, I learned God loved us so much to answer our prayers at any other time than the right time. I still quote that to myself often. What do I do when the pain is emotional and seemingly never ending? Who in the world do we process or how who no it says who. Who in the world do we process these kinds of feelings with? And what do you need and what do you do when you know you need him but trusting him feels impossibly risky? It's not just your feelings about him that seem shaky. Your bigger concern is, what does this unanswered prayer for this unending pain say about his feelings towards you? In 2015, the New York Times ran an article called Googling for God. In this article, author Seth Stevens Davowich starts by saying, "It has been a bad decade for God, at least so far." He goes on to ask, what questions do people have when they are questioning God? The number one question asked was, who created God? The number two question was, why does God allow suffering? But it was the third question that slammed into my heart and made me realize the depth at which many of us struggle when we walk through devastating situations. Why does God hate me? I'm not alone in wondering about God's feelings when circumstances beg me to feel betrayed. While I would have never used the word hate, seeing it typed out as one of the most commonly asked questions about God shows me just how dark our perspective can get. The most devastating spiritual crisis isn't when we wonder why God isn't doing something. It's when we become utterly convinced he no longer cares. And that's what I hear hiding behind that Google search. And I shudder to say this, but I think that's what was hiding behind my own disillusionment as well. What makes faith fall apart isn't doubt. It becomes too certain of the wrong things. Things like forgiveness doesn't matter. It's not worth it. It's not time for that kind of obedience. God isn't moving. What I see is absolute proof that God isn't working. That's when I can find myself getting more and more skeptical of God's love, God's provision, God's protection, God's instruction, and God's faithfulness. And most of all, when I start fearing he really has no plan at all, and I'm just truly going to be a victim of circumstances beyond anyone's control. The problem with that thinking is, while it may it line up with what my life looks like from my place of pain and confusion, it doesn't line up with truth. And before everything went haywire in my life, I had already put a stake in the ground that God's word is where I would turn and return to no matter what. What makes faith fall apart isn't doubt. It's becoming too certain of the wrong things. I could resist this. I could run from it. I could, with bitter resignation, put my Bible on a shelf to collect dust for years. But I wouldn't be able to escape what was already buried deep into my heart. I knew in this deep, hold on 1 minute. I knew in this deep down knowing place that what I was seeing wasn't all that was happening. Past seasons where I have been, when I have seen God's faithfulness, remind me that I don't always see God working in the midst of my hard days. There are a few times in my life when I've seen dramatic moves by God happen quick enough for me to say, wow, look what God is doing. But most of the time, it's thousands of little shifts so slight that the dailiness of his work doesn't register in real time. Looking back at all the years, I kept thinking nothing was happening with art. I see the makings of a very slow miracle. God was intervening and weaving and working, but my human eyes didn't detect it. On Sunday, 2 years into the battle, I woke up early. It was thundering so loudly the house shook. I was so very alone. It was pouring. I stared out the window. I didn't have the energy to fight through all the resistance, the rain, the heartbreak, the walking into church all alone, and the feeling of people's questions hovering around me as heavy as the gray clouds outside. But as I sat there thinking about what staying home would do as opposed to what going to church would do, I knew I needed to press through the storm to get where I could be reminded that God is faithful. When God loves me feels like a stabbing question rather than a reassuring fact. I've learned I must go somewhere I can be reminded that today isn't the whole story. Today is part of the story, but it's not the whole story. That Sunday was a stormy day, perfect for staying away. But it was also the Sabbath day, perfect for going where I could be reminded of God's faithfulness. It was both. It's how I chose to look at that day that would determine not just what I did, but even more importantly, what I saw. I could be isolated at home staring at the storm, or I could be listening to the truth of God being taught in a sanctuary. Both were realities that day. But the one I gave more attention to was the one that would influence my perspective that day. It was my choice. And the same was true with how I viewed whether or not God was answering my prayers. I could look at all that God wasn't doing and conclude he wasn't faithful. Or I could choose to conclude he is faithful. So if he's allowing what I'm seeing, it must somehow be part of his weaving together a much bigger plan. Now, I very much recognize that what is right in front of you may not have any kind of resemblance to what you thought the answer prayer would look like. I have a friend whose daughter is in critical care. I have another friend whose divorce was just finalized, and another friend who is struggling with so much anxiety right now, she feels like she can't leave her house. I don't understand how any of this is right or fair or good. It all just makes me so sad, so heartbroken for their pain, and it quite honestly feeds my doubts. I want to say this is where my faith revs up, my spiritual muscles flex big and strong, and a confident war cry explodes from deep within me. I am confident God will heal your daughter fully and completely. I am absolutely certain God will make your husband break up with his mistress and bring him home better than ever. I declare Jesus' name over your anxiety and demand it to be gone and your peace and joy restored. I have seen God do all that before. But I've also seen so many circumstances where they don't wake up from the coma. The husband never comes back home, and the illness stays. And instead of a fearless, faith filled war cry, I can be found just curled up on my bed in a full blown, ugly cry. All those situations seem like seasons when we are waiting to see God move, as if God just has us in some sort of quo on hold until he can get to us. As maddening as it is to wait on a surface tech to finally okay. As maddening as it is to wait on a service tech to finally get to me when I call an 800 number, at least they have an automated recording to tell me how long the wait will be. When I know help is coming in 30 minutes, 20 minutes, 15 minutes, I hold on. With God, it just seems mysterious at first and then cruel when long stretches of time pass with things maybe even getting worse instead of better. But God isn't oblivious to what's happening. You don't have to wait for him to pick up the line to become aware of the problem. I don't know what he is doing. I don't know how and when we'll start to see him move, but I do know his silence is not proof of his absence, and my broken perception is not evidence of his broken promise. If you had asked me about how I was doing that day, staring at the storm, I would have said something like, I'm desperately waiting on God to show himself faithful and to do what only he can do at this point. I'm in that hard middle place where I'm honestly weary from waiting and tired of hoping. And hidden behind all that exhaustion was a girl stuck in so much grief. Her perception of God was more informed by her pain than her past experiences of who she knew God to be. If we try and draw conclusions from the well of our deep pain, we will only have the sorrow of today to sip from. If, however, we draw strength from the deep well of God's promises for tomorrow and his faithfulness to us in the past, his living water is the goodness that will seep life into our dry and weary souls. Instead of drawing conclusions today, at least one line from a past situation where you can look back and see evidence of his faithfulness. I think I said that wrong. Instead of drawing conclusions today, draw at least one line from a past situation where you can look back and see evidence of his faithfulness. And if the grief is too heavy for you to look back, see the fact that God got this book into your hands today to be a lifeline of hope. And if you are too afraid to dare to peek over the edge into tomorrow's hope for God's promises, there's one more word I want to give you: resurrection. Hang with me through a few more paragraphs. Webster's definition for hope is not the only definition for hope. Hope is the echo of eternity assuring us there is resurrection ahead of us. Faith is believing that whether we see it on earth or in heaven, God will return the world to the description of his original design. It is all good. The perfection of Eden isn't just gone, it's also in the process of returning. In the words of my counselor Jim Kress, hope is the melody of the future. Faith is dancing to that melody right now. Isn't that one of the most beautiful quotes? I absolutely believe that hope is the melody of the good that is to come. I absolutely believe that faith is dancing to that melody right now. And I absolutely believe that forgiveness, even in the midst of all the unknowns, is the way we stay in step with the beat of God's heart. The more we forgive, the more we can know we are right in step with God, no matter what direction our life goes. God's silence is not proof of his absence. I think what I was missing when I kept waiting to forgive until I knew how things were going to turn out, until I knew if I needed to heal apart from art or toward the hope of being together again. Either way, forgiveness is always healing in the right direction. Even if you don't know whether to turn left or right, looking up to God is where real hope can be found. That's where the payoff of forgiving is the sweetest of all. That's where our story aligns with his resurrection. There was a song I kept singing that was released by my church the same year everything fell apart. The lyrics say, "The resurrected King is resurrecting me." I love the assurance of those words. I wanted that to be the anthem of my situation. But when everything looked a lot more like death than resurrected life, I found myself singing that song more as a fearful and tearful whisper than a confident declaration. I think Jesus knew this is where his disciples would be when all of their hope for a better future would soon be hung on a cross and buried in a tomb. I don't often remember in my own times of disillusion. I don't often remember in my own times of disillusionment to read Jesus' words to them just before he died, but they are so powerful. Very truly, I tell you, you will weep and mourn while the world rejoices. You will grieve, but your grief will turn to joy. A woman giving birth to a child has pain because her time has come. But when her baby is born, she forgets the anguish because of her joy that a child is born into the world. So with you, now is your time of grief, but I will see you again, and you will rejoice, and no one will take away your joy. John chapter 16, verses 20 through 22. He didn't promise their grief would be taken away and replaced with joy. He promised the grief would turn into joy. The grief would produce the joy. The grief was a part of the journey, but it would not be the way it would all end. What they had prayed for was someone to free them from the oppression of the Roman government. They got a servant who washed their feet. They wanted a ruler. They got a teacher. They wanted a justice seeking king. They got a kind hearted healer. Their answer never looked like they thought it would. They thought they were on a journey to Jesus taking the throne, but instead he took up his cross. They thought God would save them, and he did. The disciples were absolutely grieved until they were utterly amazed. Just like Jesus said would happen, their sorrow turned to joy. Charles Spurgeon made such an incredible point about the writings of the apostles after Jesus' resurrection. It was most remarkable and instructive that the apostles do not appear in their sermons or epistles to have spoken of the death of our Lord with a kind of regret. The Gospels mention their distress during the actual occurrence of the crucifixion, but after the resurrection, and especially after Pentecost, we hear of no such grief. And don't miss that part of the script of the eventual resurrection was forgiveness. Some of the last words recorded that Jesus spoke were, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." Luke chapter 23, verse 34. Then his death was the very thing that paid the debt of sin we could never pay ourselves. It sealed our forgiveness for all eternity and pointed to the resurrection promise, providing new life, perfect redemption, and eternal security once and for all. The payoff for forgiveness is tremendous. We must never doubt that giving and receiving forgiveness is worth it and so very good, no matter how our circumstances go. What if we've been looking at things from only what we think is good? From our vantage point, we can clearly see how what we're asking from God makes so much sense. In our minds, we see all the good that would surely come from Him doing exactly what we suggest. But what if our requests, though completely logical and reasonable, aren't what we think they are? Yes, from an earthly perspective, they are exactly what makes sense. But what if God sees things we can't possibly see? What if, from His perspective, what we are asking for is not at all what we'd want if we could see everything from His complete, eternal, perfect vantage point? And what if I've been thinking of this all wrong? And that's as much as we need for this chapter. Just let that question sit with you. Let it be the place you mark your emotion. You park your emotion. Let it be the door holder that leaves just enough space for you to believe the decision to forgive is possibly the greatest good decision you could ever make. What if? Chapter 11, Forgiving God. Getting hurt by people is hard. Getting hurt by what God allows can feel unbearable. While I might phrase my disillusionment as a question of why or how, when I lay my head on my tear-soaked pillow, questions can turn into bitter feelings. I probably wouldn't want to raise my hand at Bible study and admit I'm honestly struggling to forgive God. But I have questions around this. I have hurt feelings. Maybe you do too. That's where I was last week. I truly believed God would give me some time before another hard thing hit. We have a large family with lots of people who are very involved in one another's lives, so it's only understandable that there's always some kind of situation. I'm usually able to just roll with all the personalities and different ways of processing. But last week there was a situation brewing that I couldn't help reacting to with extra sensitivity. Some of my people were wanting to invest in a new business. Everyone seemed on board, but me. Again, it takes me time to figure out exactly what I'm feeling. And though I couldn't exactly put my finger on it, I knew my fear around the situation was intense. All I could see was disaster ahead. It wasn't life-threatening, but every time my people were discussing it, it felt personally threatening to me because they all assumed I'd willingly invest along with them. I was certain God was going to take care of handling it and shutting the whole thing down. I prayed. I built a very solid case with God and all my people. I trusted this was going to go away. Right from the beginning, I didn't think this investment was a good idea. I shared my concerns and even made a list of all the impossible obstacles that would need to be moved in order for me to agree to participate. There was no doubt in my mind that either God would prevent this or the complication would make it a moot point. Either way, I just knew it would all work out. But instead of God closing the doors, it seemed one after another were being flung open. It was like a miraculous intervention in reverse. Instead of God preventing it, it looked like He was moving to make it happen. And while my family was more and more thrilled by each passing day, I just got more and more withdrawn. I tried so hard to see the good in what was happening. I tried to remind myself that family members are smart business people with good track records. I tried to remind myself that not every feeling of fear is an indication of impending doom. But no matter how I tried to rally, I couldn't override the main storyline in my head. Sometimes worst case scenarios do happen. Hasn't this last season of your life made that crystal clear? Why won't you? Why won't your people listen to me? No, why won't you people? Okay. Why won't you people listen to me? I was so incredibly anxious that I was just increasingly mad and moody and stewing as every single obstacle was removed. And suddenly, this wasn't just a conversation, it was becoming a reality. Not only did I want to completely withdraw from my family, but I wanted to get a bit quiet with God too. All I could see was all the chaotic potential. I wish I could tell you I handled this with a mature attitude, eager to have calm conversations, seeking clarity and common good so we could all agree on. But I did not. I pouted. I made comments that left no room at all for speculation over where I stood with all of this. I felt like my concerns didn't matter to anyone. I cried so they heard me, so they could hear me. I shut cabinets and doors with extra force. I could feel the bitterness settling in as I planned all the "I told you so" scripts that would make me feel so very justified when this thing bombed. I sat down in front of my journal and wrote the word confused. And almost immediately, a phrase flashed across my mind. This investment is an answered prayer. What? There was no way that what I was looking at was part of God's answer to me. I refused to acknowledge the statement, but I also couldn't unhear it. Now, every time the investment was mentioned, I heard the same statement. This is an answered prayer. I sat there. I sat with that thought for more than a week now. It messed with me, mostly in a good way, but it's also poked me in an area I'm still quite sensitive in. Trusting God when I don't understand what He's doing, what He's allowing. I cannot see with my eyes or rationalize with my brain how any of this is God's answered prayer. But maybe that's the point. Maybe this is the place where it's time to start rebuilding trust with God. It's not that God did something wrong and broke my trust. It's that God didn't do what I expected, or He did something I don't understand, which makes it harder for me to trust Him. Sometimes, when there are trust issues with people, it leaves you in this weird place of suddenly wondering who else is in your world is not telling you the complete story. Even the slightest skepticism like this can quickly turn into full blown suspicions that leak into all your relationships, including your relationship with God. Maybe this is part of my healing journey where I take "what if I've been looking at this wrong" question we ended the last chapter with and try to apply this to my current situation. For 7 days now, I've been praying, God, help me to see what is in front of me as my answered prayer. And I'll be honest with you, my brain keeps firing alarming statements of resistance to this whole idea. But as I've also looked at what God's word teaches us about the way God provides for us and why I might not interpret what I'm seeing correctly, I've been quite blown away in a good way. Too good for me not to share with you. Since trust in relationships is built in part with good communication, then more effectively praying has to play a role in my trust with God. I've been praying for almost as long as I've been living, but I very rarely had the thought to look around at my life and see today, this moment, in this season, as the answered prayer. When I think about prayer requests, I think of what I hope God will do, not what has been done for today. The reason I miss seeing what I'm living today as the answer to my prayer is that very often, maybe even always, it's not what I thought it would be. God answers don't look like what I had pictured so clearly in my mind. And this is what complicates my prayer life. It all feels so unknown and unnecessary. or uncertain, I'm sorry. At times, I've seen my prayers as wishful requests that feel good to make, but deep down, I know are not very likely to happen. Like throwing a penny in a fountain or thinking of my deepest desire just before blowing out my birthday candles. I keep doing it, but truly expect very little. Or I've looked at prayers like Amazon Prime deliveries. I want what's delivered to look like what I expected and to arrive in record time. The answer will be delivered to my front door right away, and I feel so close to God because He did what I wanted. But there's something too human and too predictable about that being the way prayer actually works. Then my prayers become orders I place, the answers as cheap as products, and the sender nothing more than a far removed entity I give little thought to until I need something else. With prayer, I've expected too little of God and too much of myself. I've expected an infinite God to reduce his vast ways of doing things down to only what I can think up and pray for. I want to change this. I want to come to God with my needs, my desires, my desperate longings, and recognize whatever He places before me is His daily bread. Yes, people may create chaos. That's not from God. And yes, the brokenness of the world may bring brokenness to my reality. But in the midst of this, there is good provision from God. That's what I must look for and make the choice to see. When Jesus taught us what to pray each day, his first request was for daily bread. And isn't it true that bread took on many different forms in the Bible? Sometimes it looks like a loaf from the oven, Leviticus 2:4. Other times like manna from heaven, Deuteronomy 8:3. Or best of all, like Jesus, who declared himself as the bread of life, John 6:35. But if his provision doesn't look like what we expect, we might not recognize that what's in front of us is his bread. As First Corinthians points out, now we see things imperfectly, like puzzling reflections in a mirror. But then we will see everything with perfect clarity. All that I know now is partial and incomplete. But then I will know everything completely, just as God now knows me completely. Only God can see what's missing in our lives as we ask for His provision. We feel the ache of a need and naturally fill in the blank of what we think we need. But our lives are like a jumble of puzzle pieces. We are just slowly putting things together, piece by piece. And while we make some connections of how things fit together, we don't see the full picture yet. Therefore, we can't possibly know exactly what's missing. God sees it all crystal clear. He's never unsure or afraid or intimidated by the gaps. Let's see, what does this say? He always missing us. He allows missing pieces so that we don't have to do it all on our own. This is where his provision fits in. He always sees the shape of the missing pieces and gives us a portion of himself, which sometimes look like a loaf, other times manna, and most of all, like Jesus. All three are God's perfect provision. And with our human eyes, we would probably only recognize the loaf of bread as good and most fitting, and what a tragedy that would be. We may be crying because nothing looks like a loaf while we have manna all around us, or even better yet, Jesus himself. The loaf of bread may be what I want from God, maybe even what I expect from God. But if it doesn't look like I think it should, it can make me question his love or maybe even begin to resent him for not becoming through. I want his provision to look the way I think it will. But isn't the loaf of the least miraculous of all the forms of bread? Isn't it's the kind of provision we have to work to receive from the ground, the harvest, the wheat, and process it and then bake it, all with our own hands. And maybe that's what I like so much about the loaf of bread. Since I'm working for it, I have a sense of control. Manna, on the other hand, represents what God simply gives. The manna that fell from heaven for the children of Israel was God's perfect sustenance for their desert living. It looked more like little seeds or flakes than loaves of bread, and yet it came directly from God day by day, not from nature. and kept more than 2 million Israelites alive in the desert for 40 years. They needed it. It was miraculous. But even with manna, people had some part to play. They had to go outside their tents to pick it up. They didn't grow it, but they could count on it consistently. So control and consistency make me feel like I'm trusting God, when in reality I'm just counting on him to the level that he comes through for me. Let's not forget the best kind of bread, though, which is the bread of life, Jesus himself. This isn't provision we work for or provision we simply pick up. This is provision in Christ deposited inside of us that nurtures and sustains us all the way down to our souls. Jesus is the most miraculous provision and the one already given to us today, but maybe the one least recognized as being everything we need, and the one we struggle to trust because he is the provision we can neither control or consistently demand be delivered on our timetable. Ugh, that's not a fun sentence to read, but it is important to consider. If we have Jesus today, we are living in answered prayer and perfect provision. The one who brings about good, even from the awful we are seeing with our physical eyes, is actively working on our behalf right now. In 1 John 2 1, Jesus is called our advocate, meaning he sits at the right hand of God and intercedes for us. Romans 8:34. He is talking to the Father about you right now in ways that, if you could hear him, would make you never afraid of what is in front of you. You wouldn't question his love for you or his goodness to you. Therefore, we don't need to forgive God. We need to trust him. Now, I know you might be saying, look, Lysa, what's in front of me is awful. So this doesn't make me want to trust God more. It makes me trust him less. I understand that. I thought about my friends I mentioned in the last chapter. One is sitting beside her daughter's bed in the hospital and hearing heartbreaking news from the doctor. Another will be going to bed alone tonight because her now ex-husband is with someone else. And the other is still emotionally paralyzed with anxiety. So I could imagine them saying to me, I just want my daughter healed, my husband to come home, and my anxiety to go away. I just want my loaf of bread to look like the provision from God I expected. I know, dear friend, I know. I feel the same way about some of what's in front of me right now, too. Bigger stuff than just this investment situation, hard stuff that still makes me cry. But if God isn't giving his provision to us in the way we expect right now, then we must trust there's something God knows that we don't. We may see it in time or not until eternity. But until we see it, we can know with certainty that what he gives us truly is his good provision, whether that good is for today or part of a much bigger plan. Even when what we see in front of us feels confusing, even what we see in front of us isn't at all what we thought it would look like, even when we don't agree that this is good, we don't have to understand God to trust him. C.S. Lewis created a beautiful word picture I like to think of when I cannot understand what God is doing. He told us to think of ourselves as a house God is renovating. We think we know what work needs to be done, maybe some small repairs here and there, and then he starts knocking down walls. We are confused and feeling the pain of this level of rebuilding. But maybe his vision is much different than ours. You thought you were being made into a decent little cottage, but he's building a palace. He intends to come and live in it himself. We see a cottage, God sees a palace. We see destruction, God sees construction. We see only what the human mind can imagine. God is building something we cannot even fathom. And it's not what we wanted, but it is so very good. And in the end, maybe it's not what God is working on, but how God is working in us that matters most of all. So, pray what you know to pray. Pray what you need to pray. Pray all the words and let the tears flow into sobs and demands and frustrations and doubts mixed with hope. But then, let the faithfulness of God interpret what you see. Let the faithfulness of God build your trust. Let the faithfulness of God ease the ache of your confusion and bitterness and bewilderment. God's faithfulness isn't demonstrated by his activity aligning with your prayers. It's your prayers aligning with his faithfulness and his will, where you become more and more assured of his activity. Even if, maybe, especially if, his activity and his answers don't look like you thought they would. I titled this chapter Forgiving God, not because God needs to be forgiven, but sometimes in the middle of deep hurt, our hearts can start to wrongly believe God is at fault. When we truly feel we've asked God for something urgently necessary, good, right, holy, like saving a marriage or a loved one's life or preventing something horrific from happening, and God doesn't do it, we wouldn't say he sinned, but we would very much feel betrayed by him, our disillusioned by him, or possibly wonder if God even cares about us. When the evils of this world rage around us and terrible tragedies break our hearts, it is understandable why we weep, bang our fist on the steering wheel, scream out very hard words, feel consumed by the seemingly never ending unfairness of it all, and wrestle through all the questions berating our grief filled souls. The problem is when we form conclusions from that place because we've been talking about our perspectives, especially why we are here, aren't complete. We see only what the human mind can imagine. God is building something we cannot even fathom. What we see today isn't all there is to see. Our thinking and our ways are imperfect. We if we can't understand God's thoughts and his ways on our best days, we certainly will not be able to understand them on our worst days. The Apostle Paul was very direct with his instructions that we are to destroy arguments and opinions raised against the knowledge of God. For though we walk in the flesh, we are not waging war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but have divine power to destroy strongholds. We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God, and take every thought captive to obey Christ. 2 Corinthians chapter 10, 3 through 5. No matter what we see, when an argument or opinion enters our mind that speaks against God's goodness, we don't entertain it. We destroy it before it starts causing destruction in us. This is a much bigger deal than what I'd realized. Don't miss this. From the very beginning of Scripture, the enemy of our souls has used arguments against God to get us to doubt God and erode our trust in Him. With Eve, the enemy used the lofty opinion that having her eyes open to good and evil would help her be more like God because she would know what God knows. What a lie that was. She knew a world without evil. What the enemy tricked her into wanting was the knowledge of good and evil. In Genesis, Adam and Eve eating the forbidden fruit didn't just allow sin in the world, they traded their perfect eternal perspective for an imperfect earthly perspective. I don't want you to miss this. Adam and Eve had an eternal perspective before sin, a perfect trust in God because they saw everything in light of his good plan and absolute goodness. But when they ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, they traded their eternal perspective for an earthly perspective. And when they received the knowledge of good and evil, confusion set in. Fear of the unknown replaced the assurance and peace they had previously had. They noticed their own nakedness. They felt feelings of shame. They tried to cover themselves and hide. And one of the consequences of their sin was that they had to leave the perfection of the garden. Tragically, Genesis 3 ends with them leaving the garden, and then in Genesis 4 they have two sons, one of whom murders the other. It was such a bad trade. They gave up what we so desperately want, the clarity of seeing everything in light of eternity, for what we now struggle through, the confusion of heartbreak on earth. We are living with our eyes open to good and evil. The enemy is such a liar. This awareness didn't help mankind understand more. Sin only makes us think that what we see on earth is all there is to know. Only God sees both the earthly realm and the heavenly realm from an eternal perspective. So only God sees the full picture with everything we face. From our vantage point here in this world, we can't see everything in a complete way. We can't see the complete story. We can't see the complete healing. We can't see the complete restoration. We can't see the complete redemption. We can only see the part that exists on the earth. When I was saying God wasn't answering my prayers, what I was really saying was God wasn't doing what I wanted him to do. I know God is in control, but the more I can't understand what I see, the more I want to take back control for myself. We try to control what we don't trust. I think I've just wrongly assigned to God. Oh, let's see. I think I've just wrongly assigned to God hurt because by people. That doesn't make sense. I think I've just wrongly assigned to God hurt caused by people, when what I'm praying for is the only evidence I'm using to determine how involved God is or how faithful God is. It is no wonder I get so disillusioned. It's no wonder I cry and ask why and feel so very betrayed at times. Sometimes people can have hidden agendas and skewed motives. Sometimes people lie. Sometimes people don't seek a greater good. But none of this is true about God. He is good. He is the only source of making anything good out of everything in front of me. Trusting God with all of this is what my soul was made to do. I guess it just takes time for my battered heart and my prone to fear mind to catch up. As I factor all this into the situation I mentioned at the beginning of this chapter, I'm starting to understand why I need to see what's in front of me as God's answered prayer. It's not that I'm convinced the investment itself is not from God or is from God. And certainly God did not cause my friend's daughter to be injured or my other friend's husband to leave or my other friend's anxiety to be so intense. God didn't cause it, but he's very much aware of it. And if he very much sees a bigger picture and has a plan to take all of this and somehow weave it into something that is good, again, the opposite of faith is a doubt. The opposite of faith is being too certain of the wrong things. Let's end this chapter with how I now see what I went through with Art. Remember the story I told in the last chapter, the prayer meeting, the church, the absolute certainty I felt that God wasn't working. Enough time has now passed that I have seen more of the bigger picture unfold. Here is what I was too certain of. When I didn't see Art have an emotional response to the prayer service, I was certain that God wasn't getting through to him. When Art didn't respond to my emotions the way I thought he should, I was certain that meant he no longer cared about me. When Art was knee deep in choices that broke my heart, I was certain he was absolutely elated and loving his party life. I was too certain for many wrong things. God was moving. God was working. Art wasn't having the time of his life. He now caused that season a nightmare. God was doing his best work in the unseen. And depending on how Art responded, God would either rescue me out or reconcile us in the relationship. Either way, each day, God was God's answered prayer. And though I very rarely got the loaves of bread I kept looking for, I was living a slow working miracle I just couldn't see. I now realize God doesn't need to be forgiven. He has not wronged me. He has not sinned. I was just looking at the hardest place and thinking it was the end. I missed something so important, something I now see. What things look like from an earthly perspective, God sees differently. I kept seeing what I'd lost, the damage, the hurt, the pain. I was blinded to the fact that I don't know all there is, what's really best and what is not. And though the days were awful, I was not without God. God does some of his best work in the unseen. Every day he was providing for me. Every day he was there. And whether I could recognize it or not, I was living in answered prayers. So today, I look at what's in front of me through what I know to be true about God. This is a gift. This can be used for good. This is somehow part of a much bigger story. And I can trust him to also make it beautiful. Now I just have to keep making the choices to look for the beautiful. And I'm going to end that there and pick up later in chapter 12. So until then, brothers and sisters, keep your eyes on Jesus and your nose in the book, which is the Word of God. And let us embed the Word of God upon the tablets of our hearts, so you and I will not sin against God or be deceived. Bye-bye.